By now, I'm hoping you've figured out where you're going to be sitting, where you're going to be walking, started to get the hang of the practice. Don't worry if you're struggling a little bit or finding it weird, like any other new skill, just like we discussed yesterday. When you learn to ride a bike, when you learn to drive a car, when you learn to swim, it can feel very unnatural, very difficult in the beginning. It's just a matter of spending some time with it. I'll give you a quick tip that will really help accelerate your ability to do the practice. And it's quite simple, right? Something we talked about again yesterday. Keep your smile going as often as you can remember. It doesn't need to be a very wide smile, just a small smile. Know that you're smiling. And the second thing that can really accelerate your progress is to send that wish to your friend at any time that you're not involved in any very mentally taxing kind of activity, right? So use that opportunity to send that wish of happiness to your friend, or if you're with someone, you can send that wish of happiness to them. So this will really help accelerate your practice. Great. So let's get started today with the topic for the day's talk, right? Why pay attention to attention? I hope you had fun with the gorilla video that was shared earlier today. There's a very key message in this experiment, right? So while it is fun to see it and while it is fun to get tricked by what the experimenter is trying to do, let's see what it's telling us about our attention. Our attention only processes a small slice of the reality before us. It is almost like a spotlight. So if you go to a theater performance, you have a spotlight which is literally telling the audience where to look, where to pay attention, what is important in the moment. Anything else that happens on the stage is not visible to us. It's almost as if it doesn't exist. There are people who are changing the props, changing the sets while you're looking at the area that is lit by the spotlight. This also holds for the way we process information in not just what we are trying to count or trying to see in the things before us, but even very simply, if you hold out your arm, the size of your thumbnail, your mind literally invests 95 to 96% of your visual processing power on that small area, right? So it is extremely tuned to be very selective in the environment. It's another thing that we can move our eyes quite rapidly and change this point of focus continuously. The other message that comes across from the experiment that we saw is what I talked about, the theater, right? What you don't pay attention to literally does not exist in your experience of life. And you may have noticed this many times, right? So if you're busy with a phone and somebody's saying something to you, you might completely miss what they've asked you to do, or you're worried about work, worried about your health, something, your mind is occupied with something. Somebody else in your family asks you to pick up something, on your way, and you completely forget about it, right? So things that are not in your attention literally cease to exist in your experience of life. Just take a moment to absorb that. And what I'll do is I'll just use a few visual aids to take this point a little further. Okay. So here I have a series of little thought bubbles, right? So they are placed almost on a timeline, right? So think of this as the timeline of your experience of life. And what's happening is your attention is moving from one thing to another. So right before this talk, you might have been busy with something. Then maybe you got the video, you got the notification, your attention went there, and then something else. In the equivalent of the gorilla experiment, maybe the first time your experience of life was looking for the ball being passed between the white players. The second time around, maybe it was looking for the gorilla and the change of the curtains and change of the black team player going out. So these bubbles represent what's really the content of our attention at a point of time. And where you are, what you're doing is not as important as where your attention is. You could be driving and you could be at the same time worrying about something that is going to happen next in life, right? You could be sitting at dinner and you could be thinking about something that you want to do the next day. You could be sitting in class, if you hark back to your school days, and your teacher can be imparting very useful knowledge, and maybe you are dreaming about some upcoming sports match, or going out to play after school, or maybe you're just hungry, right? So anything can happen, and our experience of life is determined, governed by what we are paying attention to. I have repeated this a number of times, but I cannot stress how important this understanding is. It doesn't matter what you are doing, it doesn't matter where you are. What matters the most is where your attention is. The other thing about attention that you must be discovering if you've spent some time trying to practice is that attention doesn't always stay where we want it to. So here is another series, right? So the blue clouds here represent our attention being where we want it to be. So in the example of your meditation, the blue cloud would represent being with your object of meditation, sending that wish of happiness to yourself or to your spiritual friend, uh, staying with that wish. And what will happen is every now and then you'll have a distraction, right? So your attention will go towards a sensation. You might hear a sound and you might get annoyed about it, or you might start thinking about something somebody said before, or you might start thinking about the task you need to do next, or you might go on any kind of thought train, right? And the red bubbles are representing this. When you are paying attention to that, your object of meditation, your wish of happiness for yourself or for your friend, it literally ceases to be. So this is the very important thing about attention that we need to understand. So we started with understanding that our attention is involved with a very small slice of the reality that we experience. Second thing we are looking at, if something is not in our attention, it literally ceases to be in our experience of life. The third thing we are understanding about attention is that attention can often stray away from where we want it to be. So it's not just about, okay, I know that it's only a slice of reality is being processed by my attention, and I'm going to keep my attention on that slice. Okay, I have prioritized the things that I can let not be a part of my experience of life, right? Even once you have done that, your attention may not stay where you intended to be. You're most definitely experiencing this in your practice. Yet another thing about attention is sometimes it's easy to bring our attention back if you're doing something. If you're driving, your mind goes somewhere, and then, after a while it comes back. It keeps coming back. Somebody honks, it comes back. You come to a signal, it comes back. So your attention can come back quite easily. Oftentimes, we can get stuck in something that I like to call rabbit holes. And these are very dangerous attention sinks, right? So what is a rabbit hole? So rabbit hole is something, in this context, it's something where our attention gets stuck and it becomes very difficult for us to come out from it. And it could be of many types, right? So it could be like maybe you just sat one day and started thinking about what you have done in life, or you started having some anxiety about some relation with someone, or somebody said something to you and you just couldn't shake it off, or you start worrying about your future, your financial stability, and you just can't let it go. Or it could also be something, maybe you have a political ideology and you see something that goes against it, and you get very pained by that. The thing about rabbit holes is, the deeper we go into them, we are unlikely to get answers, but just more questions. We are unlikely to get resolution, just more frustration. We are unlikely to get actions that we can actually do to change our lives, just end up potentially wasting our attention, life, energy, and time in those rabbit holes. If I ask you to tell me about your day, like, you might say, I manage these like 2 3 tasks at work. I maybe walk my dog, got my child ready for school, or I cook my lunch or dinner, and okay, I talked to a few friends, caught up with them, and made had a great time at dinner, etc. Right? So you might, in 10 lines, tell me the gist of how your day went. But what's really happening is that these hundreds of thousands of attentional movements are happening all the time. So your day is not just these 4 or 5 or 10 highlights that you talk about. There is that person that you got irritated with in traffic. Maybe a coworker who's always late to a meeting or always trying to steal credit, or a spouse or a family member who does something to annoy you. Like maybe they're sloppy, maybe they're tardy, maybe they're critical of your life choices, maybe they're critical of what you do, what you wear, right? And then, of course, there are the times when you check the phone, even when there is no notification, chomping on a lot of micro news items that you read, most of which are intentionally designed to kind of provoke and grab your attention, right? So your day actually consists of these hundreds and thousands of attentional movement, and that is your experience of life, not just the high level story that you said, okay, I had a typical or ordinary day, did the kind of things that I do on most days. And these attentional movements, these hundreds of thousands of movements that are happening, are actually what are determining your experience of life, the quality of your experience. Are you feeling elated? Are you feeling ecstatic? Are you feeling frustrated? Are you feeling listless? Are you languishing? Are you thriving? Are you flourishing? All these things are determined by these hundreds and thousands of attentional movements that are happening through the day, which is why I'm sure every one of you will identify with this. You'll have a day when nothing has gone wrong, nothing has gone unexpected, and still you may not feel like you rating it as a 10 on 10 day. I mean, we live in a chaotic, unpredictable world. So if nothing has gone that you couldn't predict in that world, so it should be a fantastic day. You should have the rest of the day under control and be set for maximum happiness. So the reason that may not happen is because each moment counts, each attentional movement counts. And that is what is determining the quality of your experience of life. Maybe you were already aware of this, but you know who else is aware of this, right? So over the last couple of decades, big tech has figured out that attention determines your experience of life. Everything that you use from big tech is now designed to maximize your engagement, maximize holding your attention and monetizing it. Because attention determines your experience of life, where your attention is determines the choices that you will make in life, the actions you will take. So whether it is purchase actions or whether it is political decisions, all of these things are going to be affected by attention, because attention is defining and determining your experience of life. And today we are at a time when, as a normal human being, we are engaged in a arm wrestling contest for our attention with supercomputers, AI models that even the people who have built them can't understand how they could be so effective, right? And not only that, your own data as well as the data of billions of people like you that these are trained on. So your attention is in that battle, and it is going to continue to be in that battle, and that battle is going to get more and more one-sided, right? Attention determines the experience of your life, and right now we are in a battle for our attention. Okay, so that's the end of the doom and gloom section, just that small section, right? So gorilla experiment was fun. Seeing how, attentional movements happen, seeing the thought bubbles was also fun, but maybe this was a bit doom and gloom. But it is what it is, right? So like we discussed yesterday, there's only one winner in a fight with reality. So we understand reality. Maybe we can, contribute to making some changes about that reality. There are people like Tristan Harris and the Time Well Spent Foundation who are working on this. But let us look at what we can do individually with our own attention. So one thing is to solve the system. One thing is to change the way that big tech works or how the attention economy works. The other thing we can do is actually work with our attention. And the other thing I promised in the teaser today is we're going to get into a very effective and practical definition of mindfulness. Okay, so let's look at what we are doing in a practice. So mindfulness is a definition of mindfulness that I'll give you. So let's first look at some of the definitions that you might have heard before, and I'll tell you why I want you to move ahead from that, right? So a lot of people talk about mindfulness as being a non-judgmental awareness of what's happening in your consciousness, of the contents of consciousness. So non-judgmental is important, awareness is important, what's happening. But from what we talked about attention is going to be a very, very key component, and it's going to go in directions that we don't necessarily want it to go. It's going to get stuck in places that are necessarily not healthy or useful for us or beneficial for us. Okay. So here's the definition of mindfulness that I want you to reflect on. Mindfulness is remembering to observe mind's attention and its movement, or remembering to observe how mind's attention moves from one object to another. So few parts to it. So mindfulness originates from the Pali word sati, or the Sanskrit equivalent smriti, which means to remember, right? What do you remember? Remember to observe attention's movement, attention and its movement, right? So there are 3 or 4 components to this. Don't worry too much about remembering these or memorizing these, because you're going to actually experience them over the next few days in great detail. So what are the components of this? Remembering to observe where your attention is, what is it engaged with, what thought, what object is it engaged with, right? How is it engaged currently? We'll get more into it. Like, how is your attention engaged with the object of meditation or some other thought or distraction? So whatever is your attention is engaged with, how is it engaging with it? What is pulling your attention away from where it is currently, right? And finally, how does attention actually move? So what happens when attention goes from one thing to another? So I could be sitting here talking to you, and then suddenly maybe my laptop runs out of battery, right? And I remember I forgot to plug in the charger, and I have gone from a very different world. So I'm talking about attention, thinking about attention, and suddenly my attention, my worldview has changed to something very logistical, right? So a charger is not plugged into my laptop. So how does that movement happen? Understanding that. So I'll repeat that. Mindfulness is remembering to observe how mind's attention moves from one object to another, or mindfulness is remembering to observe mind's attention and its movement. And it consists of understanding where your attention is, how is it engaged, what is pulling your attention away, and how does it actually move. So let's look at how this really works, right? So we talked about the doom and gloom battle for attention. Now let's see how what we are doing in our practice is actually helping us. So I'm going to use a visual aid again for this. Okay. So in this case, let's look at the blue bubbles. Let's think of them as your object of meditation, your wish of happiness for yourself or your friend. In a little while, you recognize suddenly that, hey, I've started thinking about something totally different, right? This is your mindfulness kicking in. So it's something new, maybe you're cultivating in your mind. So sometimes it'll take a while to kick in. Sometimes you'll find that you've spent a minute thinking about something else and suddenly you remember, right? This is also the first step of the 6 R's, recognize. So when we recognize that our attention is away from our object of meditation, it is engaged with some other thought or some other object, some sensation, we strengthen our mindfulness, right? Our mind learns to start looking for movements of attention. We practice mindfulness like this. So every time we use the 6 R's, 6 R's now help us to get our attention from where we did not want it to be. So we talked about intention, wanting to have our attention in a certain place, yet getting distracted, right? So this is the second thing that we are practice or second skill that we are learning, which is when our attention is distracted or when our attention has wandered away to a place where we don't want it to be, something that is not useful, something maybe that is not relevant in the moment. How do you bring it back without causing violence? Bring it back with skill. So we use the 6 R's. We recognize that our attention has drifted away. We release that thought. We internally decide that we don't need to engage with this. We don't need to fight with it because it's come up. We don't need to chase after it. It's not what we want to do at the moment. So we release it, relax any tension or tightness. So like I mentioned yesterday, anything that grabs your attention literally has a gripping or grabbing effect on you, which is all tangible as a gripping or grabbing effect in your mind, right? So we're letting that tension and tightness go. It's a correlate for a mechanism of the mind that we'll get into more detail. I promise you that you'll get answers to all the things that I'm not going deep into right now. So when we relax the tension and tightness, we are allowing our attention to get out of the grip of that distraction, of something that where we don't want our attention to be. We re-smile. This reduces the grip further. This starts our movement back to a place where we want our attention to be, and we return to the object. And the understanding is this will happen again and again. It could be the same distraction if it is something that you're very attached to. You're worried about a presentation that you need to make after you're sitting. You're worried about it. It keeps coming up. Repeat 6 R's. Repeat 6 R's. That is fine. So we are building these fundamental muscles that help us to train our attention. Attention governs our experience of life. What does not belong in our attention does not belong in our experience of life. If our attention is in some place that is not beneficial to us or some place that is distressing or frustrating for us, how do we bring it back? We use the 6 R's. So these two skills, mindfulness, remembering to observe how attention moves from one object to another, and being able to bring it back skillfully when it's in a place where we don't want it to be. So these are the fundamental skills. So this is like, first we need to invest in these skills before we can start using attention to transform the quality of our life, to make sure that we go from that maybe 7/10 day when nothing really went wrong in the world for you, no one was against you, nothing unpredictable happened, you didn't have a tire that got punctured, or you didn't run out of gas or something, nothing like that happened, and still it wasn't a 10/10. So once we start building these skills, we will start moving towards that. How attention moves, how it engages with different objects, what pulls it away, and how does it go from one object to another, as we start learning. So right now, in your practice, you don't need to worry about anything. You don't need to think too much about what's happening with my attention. Primarily, what I need you to do is just practice this skill, right? And if you remember what we discussed yesterday, there is no good or bad meditation, right? So it doesn't matter how many times your mind gets distracted. That is how your mind is, that's how its contents are, right? What is important is you learn to recognize when mind's attention moves away, and you learn to bring it back skillfully. Every time you use the 6 R's, you are sharpening your mindfulness. What you can do when you practice is also determine to catch your mind a little early next time that it slips away. That is one thing that you can start doing in your practice, right? Great. So this is what we are doing right now. This is the skills we are building. And now what happens when attention moves, and what are the different things that are going to happen within that that help us understand our experience of life. Those are things that we're going to dive in very deeply over the next few days. Right now, the day one is here. We need to really start getting serious about the practice. As we discussed, it's no longer, it never was optional to train our attention, but especially in today's day and age, it is imperative for us to get skillful with our attention as early as possible. 2 sittings I need from you tomorrow, 30 minutes each, and one walking meditation of 15 minutes. Invest in yourself. It's going to really pay off, and it's going to be fun because we have a light and pleasing object of meditation, right? From tomorrow on, what we'll also require you to do is to fill an interview form at the end of the day, right? So this will be shared with you over the group, and it's fairly self-explanatory. There should not be any confusion. So fill the interview form at the end of the day. We'll get a good sense of how your attentional skills are working, what you can do to improve them better. Okay. I'll stress on this again. It's very important to be kind and patient with your mind, right? So it's like a child learning to walk. Pushing it too much is not going to make it learn faster or better, right? So be kind. All you need to do is every time you recognize that your mind has wandered away, use the 6 hours and bring it back. It doesn't matter how many times this happens. Another reminder, use the 6 hours only when your mind drifts completely away from the object. Keep smiling through the day, keep sending the wish whenever you remember to do that. And this is going to really help you become very alert to mind's movements and become much better with your practice. Okay. So I will also share a few exercises that I would like you to do tomorrow. Okay. I'll just briefly touch on them, but you'll get this also on the WhatsApp. I want you to identify opportunities for active meditation, right? So times when you're doing something mundane, not very mentally taxing or challenging, use that time to do active meditation. Send that wish to your friend, send that wish to people who are around you if you're with someone. I would also like you to take a note after you're sitting, right? Take a note of what distractions come up. Do take a look at the interview form. There are a few things that I'd like you to note after every sitting. So you need to note that, but also note what are the kind of distractions that come up. And we talked about rabbit holes, right? So these are like pet habits of ours. So, worrying about the future, worrying about, maybe you have a home to sell, or maybe you want to buy something and you're, adding up money for that, and you're worried when that will happen. Maybe you're worried about your health or the health of a family member, something where you get stuck and spend a lot of time. It could also be simply, social media usage on your phone. Times when your attention gets gripped into a thought process and it becomes very hard and almost unnatural to bring it back, right? Try to note down what your rabbit holes are. It's useful to understand the mind. It's useful to lean into your understanding of the mind to start gaining mastery of it. Okay? Great. That's it for today. And tomorrow and day after, the weekend is here. I want you to really push your practice, because from Monday onwards, it's likely you're going to have a lot more noise in your life. So if you get a little bit better hang of the practice over the next 2 days, it's going to really help you through the rest of the retreat. If you can, I highly recommend that you sit longer than 30 minutes, right? So you might need to plan your time. It may not always be practical. I understand that. But the longer you sit, the better your mind learns these skills, the better your mind starts getting insights about how different mental processes work. So I strongly urge you, if possible, sit longer. So if you plan to sit for 30 minutes, maybe you put an alarm on your phone or alarm clock for 45 minutes. So just in case you can, you sit a little longer. Try that, and I promise you it will be a lot of fun and it will be very, very rewarding. Great. I'll stop today's session with that. Keep smiling. Have a lovely evening today and a lovely day tomorrow. We'll catch you again very soon.